Chief Paul VandeGraaf, you put out a press release last week stating, it's not for lack of a better word, stating your very much frustration with the court system.
Yeah, you know what? Like it was dumbfounding. It was the tweet that I put. I'm just dumbfounded. So let's just review what we have here. So we have a known location in town, and it's no secret what address on John Street we're talking about, which has been a thorn in our side. The community is rather upset about what goes on at this particular location. Yet they're supportive of the work that the members of our service do every day. So recently, at a Committee of Adjustments variation, I was on that meeting and I heard these comments and I took it to heart. So we redeployed our team. We spent extensive time and energies, our officers away from their families, long periods, continual investigative processes, and an arrest is made. This individual came from the Toronto area to our community for the sole purpose of dealing in illegal narcotics. This person was on house arrest conditions for violent crime, alleged violent crimes, that being robberies in Toronto. Numerous.
And we say that, I believe it was gun involved.
Yes. So he's released on conditions, very strict conditions, that basically say you're not to be away from home without a surety. We understand, because it can be a little bit confusing in the court system, up to $28,000 in non-deposit surety. In other words, a promise to pay. $28,000. This person comes to Cobourg and is arrested in the middle of the night. He lies to the police. He offers a false name. He's arrested, he's held, his real name, his real identity becomes known, and he goes before the Justice of the Peace for a bail hearing. So these are the circumstances that police find themselves across the country, let alone here in Cobourg. Then when they get to a bail hearing, the Justice of the Peace sees fit to release this person to the same surety who was unable to keep the person in a house arrest conditions with a $3,000 no deposit surety. There's been no efforts to collect the previous promise of $28,000 unpaid. Now maybe the Toronto Crown is making those applications. But here we have an individual for no reason. It's not like he was found 2 blocks from his residence at the convenience store buying a bag of milk, which I could say, you know what, that I could overlook that. No, here's a person who's willingly chosen to drive to another community to prey upon the vulnerable people in our community who are suffering addictions by bringing in illegal drugs that are lethal, and we have now increases of overdoses. I'm not saying they're linked to this one individual. I'm saying this is the fight that police services have in Ontario. And here we stand one more time with this person released and back. If I and my members go to work every day, and it's really to the troops here, and they make the good arrests, and they hold the right of people accountable, and you can't keep this guy in bail hearing, why do we have a bail court? And that's why I'm done. Bill C-75, when it was released in the late 2019, came out with a very clearly laid out ladder principle. We are at the top rung of the ladder. He had already been released in front of a Justice of the Peace with a surety, with a non-cash deposit penalty. The next rung on the ladder was detention, and our Justice of the Peace decided to release him yet again down a rung.
I can say that when I used to cover courts more, the courts used to be a lot more strict. In other words, if you can't abide, you're in jail until your court appearance. If you can't play by the rules.
In the olden days, that's right. Bail courts were it was always a reverse onus or a primary onus situation. You were given the first chance. The second time it was on the member. Now, we understand that a lot of people from marginalized communities were being arbitrarily detained because they couldn't find a cash surety, and the system wasn't perfect. And it needed to change. We had a lot of people doing what we call dead time, waiting for their trial, and when they were eventually released, they served more time in custody than they would have ever for a sentence. So I totally agree that the system had to change. But the system had to change to a point. This is an example of we went way beyond that point. Here's an individual on house arrest conditions. To me, that reads, this is your last chance until the next time. And that's our frustration, because again, at the end of the day, The general populace doesn't understand this. The general populace doesn't understand the nuances of a court system. And I get the pressure saying, Chief, that like you don't even hold any of these people in. Like why? So I've been out and we've talked before about saying it's not only us. And in my opinion, today on last Friday, the partner in this system let us down. They let the men and women of this service down, and they let the community. In that community, they let that community down. And that's a long and short of it. And unfortunately, it's not uncommon. Chief DeRapida in Peel, Chief Tanner in Halton, they've both come out and said the exact same things, and they've had violent gun-related crimes, or people are getting released on bails after someone's been shot or maybe even died. The system isn't addressing these very severe cases effectively.
I know as a person that's not in the know that much about it, how does the system change?
Well, use the rules you have in place. Like, just take the rules you've created and follow them. So in this case, that ladder principle.
And explain what that is a little bit.
So the ladder principle is the first time you enter into a system, the first time a person's charged with an offense, every effort should be to release the person as soon as possible to the community. So you have a person, let's say they get caught for doing a break-in at. And I'm talking about adults, because youth's a different story. So that person's arrested, we should make sure we identify who the person is, we know who the person is. We should be releasing that person with a promise to appear or an appearance notice to appear at a future court date. We shouldn't even be thinking about detention. Now, there's immediate detention, they come back to the station here for a bit to get processed, but that's it. And then if the person goes out and commits another crime, okay, now we're gonna rearrest them, we're gonna charge them potentially with a breach, maybe we're gonna add some conditions like curfews or signing in once a week or no alcohol or just different conditions. And then if they breach it, and then they go up, and then maybe there comes a time where they're at a bail hearing, and then they're gonna have to have somebody stand up and say, hey, I promise to make sure that my son abides by the rules the court has put in, and that's a no cash surety. And then there's the cash sureties where people actually put money at the table, and this is where we get up the ladder. And when we're at the ladder, when we're at that point, the top of the ladder is detention, and at some times people have to be detained for the betterment of the community and community safety. This is not a person who's run around and done 17 acts of petty larceny or petty theft. This is an individual who has committed violent crimes in Toronto. Allegedly. He is in on a bail custodial sentence with basically house arrest, drives 2 hours to our community to sell drugs, allegedly. Although the drugs were found on him. And we have to ask, why was he in Cobourg? Doesn't have an address in Cobourg. He's supposed to be in house arrest in Toronto. And here we are. So again, at this point, detention was, to me, the obvious next step.
The last question, and this might be tricky, but I mean, do we have to hold the JPs to accountability, or is it the system? Well, it's not the system, because if the system was done right, the individual would have been in custody.
Yeah, it's not for me to say any one person's accountable. I know on this particular circle where we have offense committed, we have to prove our offense. I'm comfortable with the evidence we've attained. We have a community problem. We know why we were there. It wasn't arbitrary in any way, shape, or form. It was directed enforcement at a particular problem spot. This is my analytic approach to crime. We knew the problem was there. We heard it and we saw it. We executed the plan. We arrested the person. Now when we come to complete the circle, justice must prevail. And I don't ever worry about what the sentence looks like. That's totally not my world. But in this case, it is my world when our officers are left to manage a repeat offender in this nature. It's just not acceptable. It's not honoring my people. In my opinion, the bail system in this incident did not fulfill its obligation to the team.
Last question on this subject, and there's really no doubt it will happen again.
You know what? I think it was 2 years ago, August this year, so shortly after I was sworn in, I think you and I did this exact same interview. Exact same problem, no further ahead.